So this is Divine Wind by Jay Wilburn. Hannah Winston started as a soft woman married to a hard man. Almond was not an unkind man by nature, but he couldn't always live up to those ideals. Over the years, they both hardened. Farm life, especially in the era of the western United States and territories, was a difficult existence, so Hannah had to harden a little. She felt the worst for her children. Life was not easy for them, and Hannah's warmth only went so far to thaw the coldness they got from their father and the realities of a harsh world. The open plains were beautiful, but that often covered over the dangers and unforgiveness of the land. As the children grew up, married, and moved back east, they did not visit as often. Hannah sensed their love in letters, but sometimes love wasn't enough to bring people back to harsh land filled with hard memories, and a father who didn't know how to show the kindness hidden in his heart. Bitterness started to eat away at Hannah from the edges. As they grew older, the work was only easier by degrees. Towns built up closer, making sales easier when crops were good. Paved roads helped as much as they could. With age, Almond worked a little less, meaning Hannah, with the curse of good health, had to work more. Often, those long, hard days out in the fields were a blessing of solitude. She did not come so far as to hate the man, but she appreciated her time away from him, even if the work threatened to break her back. A storm was coming in, and she'd lived long enough to know that was nothing to take lightly. Still, she leaned on the rough wooden post strung with wire. As she bent her head into the wind, she thought she could still see stains from the blood off her knuckles that the day they first strung this old fence. As the sky darkened into sinister threat, she kept her place in the whipping grass at the end of the wheel ruts. It picked up even more and pulled the fabric of her dress tight around her curves. She squinted into the dust peppering her face, and was surprised not to see a funnel cutting its deadly course across the plains. If she let her imagination go, she could invent the image of a dark twister to go with these powerful winds, but this was something else. She had tarried for the coming of some other species of wind. The wires snapped first and crack shot with killing force. Maybe she was cut. Perhaps it was her own blood sprinkling her face, because rain shouldn't be that hot. The posts pulled free and lifted into the air, leaving deep pitted scars in the ground, normally held tight by the twisting roots of the grasses. Even the ground itself started to peel away in layers. She watched distant buildings rip apart into wooden flats. As these twisted up into the sky, the boards and nails separated. Then those pieces broke up into splinters and dust. Hannah turned her head in time to see the roof of their house take flight. As it exploded on the wind, she wondered if old Almond was in there with it. In the freedom of oblivion, she cast her arms out into the tearing winds, as if to embrace the force of it. Her clothes, her skin, her bones, her soul joined the debris as everything came apart. Hannah Felton sat across the table from Henry. He was a hard-working man at a thankless job, but there were probably 100 more like him in the apartments above and below. Down the block, 1,000 more told the same story. Across the city, countless others lived a template of the same life. This time she had no children to worry about. Just enough food for the pair of them. Their roof and their lives required tending. Part of her soul missed the children she never had in this life. The rest of her soul was taken up with the demands of just trying to get by. It was them against the world. At least that was the promise they'd made in youthful days, and they had believed that vow for a number of years. Street noise echoed up and through the single-pane windows. The cold bled through with more intensity. The radiator cooked her on one side as the winter chill froze her from the other. It was that frozen side that looked across the table at poor old Henry. The glass shook from the first blasts of stronger wind. The tinkling sound of either dirt or sleet tapped the glass with the second rush of winds. As debris filled the view even on this high floor, Hannah folded her arms and waited for what was to come. Lights blinked out across the city, and that darkness could easily have been an empty void for all that she could see. Henry looked up and his eyes went wide. He knocked over his coffee, which absorbed into the bottom fold of his newspaper. He looked at her, back outside, to her, and on the damage spreading through the city one last time. "Do you know what's happening?" She shrugged, even though he wasn't looking at her. "It's out of our control, just like everything else." His eyes started to tear up, and she wondered if there had been more potential in him than she had ever realized. Was that the same story in all these other apartments and buildings along all these darkening streets? "It wasn't always bad," he said. She shook her head, with him still not looking. "Not always, never always." "Us against the world," he whispered, just in time to break her heart. The glass shattered inward. Furniture lifted and spun away. The lights remained on for a surprising amount of time as the destruction spread. Brick and plaster folded away to a sheer drop on the windy street. Henry lifted and soared away into the dark sky. Maybe there was another life waiting for him. Hannah surrendered herself to the wind and allowed herself to be deconstructed with the building and the city. Hannah Rift sat on a grimy couch in the center of a small trailer. The picture on their boxy television kept jumping, but she wasn't attuned to what was playing anyway. Simon was not a good guy. He was an angry drunk, and he wasn't a decent man when he was sober. He might have been at work that day, could have been out drinking, or might have been rolling with some other woman, maybe in this very trailer park. Hannah was just satisfied at the moment that he was gone. This trailer was smaller than their last, which was smaller than the house they squatted in, which was small in comparison to their last apartment, which was even ever so smaller than the dreams they had had when she lied to herself about what she could be with a guy like Simon. "Us against the world," she whispered, with only part of her mind engaged. She blinked a few times and tried to remember where that was from. It felt wrong in her mouth. This was the wrong life for that. As the wind started this time, she did not bother going over to greet the end. She heard the screams as the other structures around their lot lifted and tore away. Wooden porches snapped. Sheet metal rattled as it unraveled. Her trailer came apart in layers. As the paneling broke away last, she found herself outside in the torrent of flying debris. Hannah lifted with the couch, but wanted so badly to be away from it that she pushed off in the air. Instead of flying, she fell, and closed her eyes as the ground rushed toward her to break her, as life always did. She seemed to fall forever, without ever finding a place to land. Hannah would be happy to melt into Carla's arms. Everything was fine. Life was not a series of disappointments punctuated by terrors or pain, as she always seemed to fear it was doomed to become. In Hannah's more morose moments, Carla would always trace the pad of her thumb over Hannah's eyebrow. Sometimes she would ask about a scar there that divided the small hairs. "I don't remember," Hannah would say. "Another life, maybe," Carla always responded. Hannah had started saying, "I don't want another life. I don't want this one to end." Carla would then gently kiss. Alright, I found a typo. Alright, Carla would gently kiss that scar, making Hannah's eyelids flutter with the fine shivers up her back. And Carla would say, "Let me push back the darkness for you a little while longer. I don't want to lose you." Carla assured her, We are still fighting, and we'll beat this together. This is not the end of our story." Hannah knew what it was like to be loved and to spend her life loving back. She also knew this hidden threat within Carla's own body had ended plenty of stories just like theirs. What made their lives too special to end? What made this life any different than a million others that had already ended upon the winds? Carla gave a hefty snore right next to Hannah's ear. She covered her mouth to stifle the laughter. It hurt her ribs to hold it in, but she didn't want to disturb Carla's sleep. She had so much trouble sleeping on the bad days. Hannah would give anything for a million more of even the worst days she had with Carla. She'd take an eternity of them if they were offered. Eventually, Carla let go of Hannah's shoulder and rolled over, still breathing and sleeping peacefully. Hannah was most grateful for this today. Hannah was tired, but not yet ready to sleep. Too much thinking without enough answers. Too hard to push away the darkness for now. She walked out onto their patio as the sun set over the ocean. With her hands in her deep pockets and her feet bare, she crossed the thick grass and walked out on the stones over the water. Everything was slightly too cold for bare feet, but that somehow made it all perfect. Wind blew in over the crashing waves. It twisted and flipped her hair about her head in the dying light. It was not the tearing wind, not the winds of the end, not yet. So Hannah watched the sun extinguish itself into the sea. She was not ready for the end, so she hoped those final winds held off for a little while longer. All winds and waters, all of them, tore everything down given enough time. And as it would happen, the sun would rise at her back again the next morning. For that, she rose up thankful for another day.